All right, thanks for the introduction. So I'm Qing from Berkeley. Today I wanted to share, actually it's an update on the Wildfire NGD test for the E3SM project. And I want to first acknowledge my collaborators, Riley Fali from Berkeley, and Li Shi, James Randerson from UC Irvine. Thanks. So the overall goal is twofold. First is to improve the E3SM model predictability of wildfire, land surface wildfire, in terms of the burn area emissions and post-fire carbon neutron dynamics. And then the second part is the coupling of land surface fire emissions with the atmosphere. So actually, given this amount of emission, what will happen in the atmosphere in terms of, for example, the aerosol depths, surface climate, and so on. So this update is again twofold. I'm going to share the E3SM land surface wildfire modeling with machine learning, and then secondly, the work from the atmospheric part. So just a little bit background. The wildfire dynamics is continuously evolving along with the climate change and the human activities. So on the top right here, we have an example of Western U.S. forest where the high risk, the fire risks are. And this study showed here the Western U.S. forest is experiencing drier and drier climate along the time, and therefore the surface fuel aridity becomes higher and higher, which could explain about 76% of the variation in the forest fire burn area. And the conclusion here is pretty straightforward. The dry climate causes higher fire risk, particularly for this western part of the U.S. In the bottom here, if you look at a larger scale, and here they found that there is a continuous decline in contrast to the western U.S. Here at global scale, there is a continuous decline of fire activity, and this decline is mainly caused by the African fire dynamics, mostly the northern part of Central Africa. And that is because the population growth, the denser population, more human activity, suppression of the wildfire, livestock density goes up, grazing goes up, so that the surface fuel availability becomes lower, and therefore the wildfire activity and the burn area becomes lower. And because of this region is the dominant or critical fire region at global scale, so if we add them up at the global burn area or fire activity into one number, then we will see at global scale the fire activity is actually declining. So therefore, it tells us that wildfire has a complex interaction with climate, with human, and that induce different dynamics over different regions. It's really complex and regional dependent. And so the question that relates to the E3SM community or relate to our NGD project is that first we wanted to accurately simulate the surface land surface wildfire in terms of burn area and then in terms of emissions. And then we have been thinking about parameterization based on the current model structure of wildfire existing in the E3SM land surface model. But also we're exploring more new techniques by using machine learning based algorithm to reformulate the response between wildfire burn area and also the surface variable, land surface variables. So we kind of do both and then see which one works better. So here is a general structure of how the wildfire works in the E3SM land model. So the top row here we have input variables. So we have lightning frequency and population density tell us that the ignition sources, and also the population plays a suppression role on the fire activity. And then we have vegetation characteristics, so mostly that's the biomass, how much fuel we have over the land surface to be burned. And that's the fuel load in a fire model. And also we have relative humidity of soil moisture. That's actually the topsoil moisture, because we don't have an explicit leader layer. So we use soil moisture. Ideally, we should use the leader moisture to understand the fuel combustibility. But in the model, we use the soil moisture to supplement that. And so put them together now, we have ignition, suppression, fuel load, and how easy the fuel can burn. And then we prescribe a nonlinear function and then simulate the fire counts using those 4 input variables. And secondly, now we know how many fires we have for each grid cells. And secondly, we wanted to know how big the fire is. So we use the surface soil moisture and the wind speed to simulate how fast the fire can spread. So that's a fire spread term. And then multiply them together, we have burn area for each grid cell. So that's the general structure, modeling structure of E3SM. And given a burn area, then we can calculate the actual loss of the biomass, the mortality of the tree, and the emissions given this amount of burn area. So I wanted to highlight here, we have, although we have a sort of process-based model here, simulating fire counts and fire spread separately. It's PFT dependent. So we have parameters, controlling parameters that link the fire counts with those 4 input variables and link the fire spread rate with those 2 input variables. And prescribe nonlinear response functions on the right-hand side. And they're generally different for each plant functional type. Those are the controlling parameter that we can work on during the parameterization at the parameterization stage. So we can generate different nonlinear response shape of the function by changing those controlling parameters, and then run through the model, run a large number of ensembles and compare with the observed burn area, so that we know what are the best parameter sets will be for the E3SM land model. And that's the general, that's the logic of this process-based model tuning. And here we have some preliminary results in the bottom here for E3SM land model burn area, simulated burn area. It has been improved compared with the original untuned version, but I would say it's not satisfactory. And that's one of the reasons why we explore the machine learning possibilities. So here after tuning for each plant functional type, we still see a lot of bias. Although globally, on the left, globally we see the temporal dynamics generally is generally good. Although the non-growing season, non-fire season model simulated burn area is higher than the benchmark. The green line is the benchmark. The purple line is the simulated results. And we also see for some particular years, the peak fire season, the model also overestimated peak fire season burn area. But if you look at the spatial distribution of this model data misfit or bias, we see that even though the global, we tune the model so that the global temporal dynamics becomes much better, but at regional scale, we still see a lot of bias. For example, here we have for the African major fire regions, the model generally underestimate the fire burn area. And for the other areas, the model generally overestimate and put them together. So they compensate with each other, and then the global time series give us sort of a reasonable estimate. But regionalized, we still have a big bias. And this process is very time consuming. So we go through, we pick up controlling parameters here and tune for different plan functional type, and then go back and run through the model, compare with the benchmark, and identify the region where the most of the bias is coming from. And then look into the plan functional type to see which plan functional type it is, and then fine tune the controlling parameter for that particular plan functional type. It's very time consuming, and still it's not working perfectly right now. And so we, at the same time, we think, so in here, in practice, we have input variables, lightning frequency, population density, and so on. We have output variable, burn area. And so we just wanted to know the functional relationship between burn area and those 5 input variables. And the process-based model give us prescribed relationship and tunable controlling parameters. So what about those prescribed functional shape is not that right? And then we still work on that. But at the stage of parameterization, we still believe they are right and work on the controlling parameters. That might be totally wrong because the prescribed function is not that right. And so we think that maybe we should not use those prescribed relationship and just put in there a lot of latent variable in the between the input and output variables, the burn area and the 5 input variables, and then let the machine learning algorithm to figure out the actual functional response. And we do that for different fire region, 14 GFAT fire region, rather than the 17 plan functional type, different type. So the degree of the freedom of the model, that they're about the same. However, here we don't have the constraint from the prescribed functional response or functional shape, and that gave us a high possibility to capture the observed burn area. So that's a general idea. And then we try a bunch of different machine learning algorithms here. We have decision tree, random forest, grading boosted decision tree. Those are 3 the highly used or widely used machine learning algorithm in the literature. And then we also have multi-layer perceptron and LSTM. Those are 2 neural network based. And also we have support vector machine. So we try a bunch of different machine learning algorithm here and evaluate the model performance at each grid cell level and also at global levels. Here is the summary of this evaluation. So we have first we have 4 errors. Those are the grid root mean square error, grid mean absolute error, and also at global scale sum up the global values, and we have global root mean square error and global mean absolute error. And then finally, how much variation in the observed burn area is actually explained or is consistent with the simulated values. So we wanted to see lower mean square error, root mean square error, and mean absolute error, and higher explained variance, meaning the model is more successful. So on the top here, we see that the red line, so the red shape, the LSTM is the model that gave us the best performance in general across different perspectives. It has the highest explained variance, almost 80%, and also it has the lowest root mean square error and the mean absolute error. So this is the modeling machine learning algorithm exploration that give us a lot of confidence that the LSTM type of model should work for these wildfire burn area simulations. And then here are some results summarized at global scale. So for different, on the left, we have different time series of this burn area. The observation, the red, and the E3SM or the machine learning model simulate the blue line. And both show a quite strong declining trend, which is consistent with what we have discussed before here at global scale. The Angular 2017 paper also uh, um, highlight there's a strong decline of the fire activity. And also there's in terms of seasonal dynamics from January to December, here we also see pretty good agreement between observed and simulated burn area. And the shaded area is just a variation across different years for a particular month. And here I have a movie shows comparing observed and a model burn area across from 1997 to 2005, but I'm not sure if I can show here. Oh, it still doesn't show up. So I need to go to the presentation mode to show them the movie, but it doesn't show up. Anyway, this is the reason I focus on this region is because this is a critical fire zone. And this is where the E3SM has the largest burn area bias, where and also it is the major reason that why the global fire activity is declining. It's because of the dynamics of this fire region. And that's the reason why I show the temporal one-to-one comparison between observation and model for each grid cell over this region. But for some reason it couldn't show up. So in summary, here we developed a machine learning version of this fire model in E3SM, but we still keep the interface unchanged. We still have inputs variable lightning frequency, population, vegetation, soil moisture, and wind speed, and we have the output variable burn area. The reason why we do this is that we wanted to later on plug in this model back into the E3SM so that we can have a second option for simulating a burn area. And also it is very it improved the model simulated accuracy by a lot, but also more importantly, it saved us a lot of time because we have been calibrating a process-based model for a long while. It is very time consuming, and it highly depends on we do need to retune the model anytime that the land surface model parameters change. For example, when the parameter related to the vegetation dynamics change in the parameter file, so the vegetation either is high, biomass is higher or lower, that will affect this fire calculation. So in that sense, in that case we have to retune the fire model again, even though I would assume the previous tuning or previous performance is good enough. But whenever we change the land surface parameters, we have to change retune the fire again. So that's really time consuming. And however, if we switch to this machine learning algorithm, the parameterization time can be totally ignored in just a few minutes. Then we can retune the model. So that means the land surface wildfire module can be easily aligned with whatever version we have, latest version we have for the land surface vegetation dynamics and soil dynamics. We can very quickly adjust the wildfire module just within a few minutes. And also we try to identify controlling variables. contributing to each particular fire event. That's the secondary outputs of this LSTM machine learning framework. So we group here we highlight the African region again, and also here we see that the population on the left, we see that the climate has a really strong impact. However, if we decompose into different individual variables, here we see the population is actually the most important driving factor for this region. And again, consistent with the previous study that we just discussed. And so for the first part, we summarize here the machine learning surrogate fire model really produced a high frequency, but more importantly, it's high accuracy wildfire simulated results. But more importantly, the parameterization is very fast, so that we can keep this fire module tuned along with the land surface model, any changes in the land surface model. And also it has the analytic capability, so that we know what for each particular event, we know what is the underlying controlling factor to cause this fire event. And the second part here I have is the work is mainly done by Li Xu at UCI. I wanted to also discuss the work that we try to link the land surface wildfire emission with the atmosphere. So previously we don't even have that capability in the E3SM land model. We have land surface fire burned, and those carbon emissions, they just disappear, and there's no transport of that source from the land surface to the atmosphere. And Li Shi has been working on that to figure out how to link the land surface fire with the atmospheric aerosol depths and surface climates. So she runs a bunch of different simulations here for the no fire, three cases in this experiment. So no fire means just a control run. There's no fire sources, aerosol sources. And then the original fire meaning using the observed GFAT emission data and feed that into the model and simulate the aerosol depths, optical depths. And then adjusted fire means adjust the fire emission from the GFAT data, but rescale it according to the AeroNet observed ALD. So in that sense, there is a scaling factor here. The example on the right, we have a scaling factor 2.79 for this particular region. And for other region, it might be a different number. The idea is to adjust the GFAT emission data so that the simulated ALD is close to the AeroNet ALD as much as possible. And then evaluate the model, the larger scale with independent data set, modest ALD. Here we see no fire, original fire, and adjusted fire. So different color. Compare with the black line, the modest ALD. We see that adjusted fire is pretty good at this stage. It can even capture some particular year we have huge fire emission, those big fires, and the adjusted fire is able to actually capture that. Although over the non-peak fire season, the red line, the adjusted fire simulation still seem to underestimate the ALD. But in general, seasonal dynamics also looks good on the right, comparing the red line and the black line. And in terms of surface climate, so we have increase of ALD over those critical fire zone across the pantropical region. And consequently, the incoming solar radiation is reduced. And then the temperature is reduced, so there is a cooling effect, as particular for those pantropical region. And the precipitation dynamics is a little bit complicated, but in general, it is also reduced over a large fraction of the land surface at pantropics region. So that is the evaluation of that give us the confidence that if we do allow those emission into the atmospheric atmospheric part of E3SM, then we will see a big change of ALD and also surface climates, which will in return significantly impact land surface vegetation dynamics and the soil activities. So that give us the confidence that the work is valuable, and we wanted to incorporate this emission from the land surface to the atmosphere. So this is a more recent work done by Li Xu. She actually provided PFD-dependent emission factor for each species, carbonaceous species, sulfur species, emitted from the land surface because of a wildfire, and then put that into the EIM, and so that we can simulate the aerosol burden and also the ALD, and then consequently the surface climate change prognostically. That means the E3SM now is able to first simulate the land surface fire emission, then at the same time propagate that into the atmosphere, and then simulate the consequence of this land surface, the wildfire emission. And then if we couple it back in the couple mode, couple it back, we will instantaneously see the impacts on the land surface carbon dynamics again. So this really gives us a great opportunity to evaluate the interaction between land surface and the atmosphere in terms of fire activities, which is very exciting because we don't have that capability before. Even though this interaction is very important and valuable to explore. So for summary for the second part, here we first evaluate the adjusted fire emission with the E3SM atmospheric modeling framework to confirm the big impacts of the fire emission on the atmospheric ALD on the near surface climate, particular for the peak fire season. There's a big change and a big correction. And also we have fire aerosols. We see that fire aerosol induce a very strong surface cooling, particularly for the pantropical region, and because it's scattering or absorbing a lot of sunlight, and so reduce the surface incoming radiation. And lastly, we have the fire-associated aerosol species instantaneously incorporated into the atmosphere. That's the new capability for the E3SM model right now. That's all I wanted to update or share today. And thanks for everyone for coming, and I'd like to take any questions. Thanks.